Go.
59 million Filipinos are suffering from moderate to severe lack of consistent access to food. This is according to a report by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, which puts the Philippines as the most number of food insecure people in Southeast Asia from 2017 to 2019. In Quezon City, 20% of households are moderately food insecure, while 15% of households suffer from severe food insecurity, according to the 2018 expanded National Nutrition Survey conducted by DOST Food and Nutrition Institute. On the other hand, the World Food Program noted that there is an alarming nutrition situation in the Philippines. Malnutrition is widespread across the Philippines, but there has been little progress in addressing undernutrition and overnutrition. In Quezon City, for almost 1.1 million children, stunting among preschool children, particularly in poorer households, is at 30%, while underweight is at 17% and wasting at 7%. Moreover, overnutrition is also an important concern, with overweight and obesity as 20% in school-age children. Quezon City is the most populous city in the Philippines with 2.9 million residents. It houses one of the country's largest population of the urban poor. And today, during the COVID-19 pandemic, our situation has exacerbated the food security of urban poor communities in Quezon City. The pandemic has disrupted food systems. Families resort to cheap and unhealthy food options. Rising prices of basic commodities continue, and economic instability among Quezon City residents is an alarming rate. These are just some of the pertinent information regarding the state and the situation of food security and nutrition in Quezon City. This highlights that there is an urgent need to address the issues and challenges on food security and nutrition in Quezon City, not just for today, but also for the future. Now, we will discuss our 2050 vision and backcasting of Quezon City's food security and nutrition.
In the year 2050, we envision a sustainable and food secure Quezon City free from hunger and malnutrition. As we are conceptualizing our own vision for this project, we have decided to build it upon the foundation of two known development projects, the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030 and Ambisyon Natin 2040. One of the components of Sustainable Development Goals is its Zero Hunger Challenge, which calls for zero stunted children under the age of 2, 100% access to adequate food all year round, all food systems are sustainable, 100% increase in smallholder productivity and income, zero loss or waste of food. The Ambisyon Natin 2040 envisions that Filipinos are comfortable, maginhawa, no one is poor, no one is ever hungry. With these two in mind, we created this vision for 2050 for Quezon City that is free from hunger and malnutrition. A lot has already been published as to how these ideals were achieved or to be achieved. But more importantly, the standards of measurement of its success should be laid out as early as possible. Our framework is based on the study of ATPC on methods and instruments to implement the right to food. There are three indicators as to how we'll achieve freedom from hunger and dietary requirement sufficiency. These are availability, accessibility, and adequacy. In availability, this talks about the quantity and quality of sufficiency of food to meet dietary needs of individuals. It constitutes the supply and demand, how we should address the demand of the growing population by making enough supplies for the people. On accessibility, it talks about the need to identify ways that are sustainable and do not interfere with other rights. So these are composed of physical and economic aspects. Physical in terms of parks or green spaces to encourage physical activity or well-being. Farm to market accessibility. In terms of economic aspect, we talk This includes income, education, and pricing. The interplay among these three really constitute or do a big part in achieving that accessibility goal for the right to food. Inadequacy and safety, it means that it is free from adverse substances and culturally acceptable. It ensures access to food, to clean food, to hygiene and sanitation. Um, in a more specific discussion, this the availability aspect of our project is that QC ensures that there is sufficient supply of food to meet the growing demand of the population of the city while managing food waste. QC ensures that there is an equitable allocation of food resources to every household, thus zero hunger. QC has sustained its urban agricultural programs through community engagement, backyard gardening, community gardening, and school gardens. In terms of accessibility, QC should ensure reasonable pricing of food and that households have the financial capacity to have access to nutritious food. Yung economic resources dapat ng bawat sambahayan ay kayang bumili ng mga pagkaing masustansya at makapag-provide sa kanila ng complete nutrition or ng complete vitamins na kinakailangan nila. QC residents are well educated on healthy diet through partnerships with the academy. QC residents have access to in terms of to community markets in terms of proximity. Itong community markets na to, this encourages QC residents to sell their produce from the urban or community agriculture program na na-establish through the Quezon City government. Lastly, inadequacy and safety. QC Quezon City ensures adequate nutrition, health, and well-being of its residents. Specifically, micronutrient intake for mothers and infants, school children, dahil yung micronutrient intake nila ay very important for development. This has developmental impacts. Moreover, QC government should ensure quality standards of food provisions and health services in order to meet the desired nutrition, health, and well-being of its residents. So who should be involved in these projects? Three actors: QC government, academe, CSO, and private sector. Currently, the QC government has already established the Quezon City Food Security Task Force. Yung Food Security Task Force na to, currently sila yung namamahala sa logistics and distribution of the ayuda or like networks of food and delivery during this time of the pandemic. But after this pandemic, hopefully they will be able to carry out their mandate to formulate and implement food security and resilience plans for long-term recovery phase that will follow soon after this pandemic. The academe is in charge of the research and policy recommendations, and then CSO and private sector for community participation.
So for our backcasting, so in the year 2040 to 2050, we should be reaping the fruits of our vision. So kanina na-establish naman na natin yung mga objectives and goals natin in terms of accessibility, availability, and adequacy and safety. But in this decade, it is important to note the action points that we should be doing. First is the monitoring and evaluation of programs and policies. So by this decade, ang assumption ay na-implement na fully ang ating mga programs and policies that will address the issue of food security and nutrition. But it is important to have a constant monitoring and evaluation of programs and policies para makita natin kung saan yung mga areas for improvement ng mga programs na ito. At itong evaluation na to will inform the policy decisions na kailangan pang i-undertake to further the vision of Quezon City in terms of food security and nutrition. And lastly, ayun nga, yung attainment of goals and objectives ng 2050 vision natin ay dapat ma-ensure natin during this time.
To ensure growth and development by 2030 to 2039, QC government should have already kickstarted the initiatives and programs committed to the 2050 vision. During this decade, programs and projects should already be in full implementation. The appropriate and necessary technology and infrastructures are already in place. In terms of our framework, availability, accessibility, and adequacy, in terms of availability, QC has already implemented the urban agricultural program to the entirety of the city. So from backyard or small scale or yung panaka-naka nating implementation ng program, by this time, dapat buong city nagagawa na siya or like na-implement na siya. In terms of accessibility naman, QC has assured the stability and affordability of prices of food and basic commodities. So by this time, there is an interplay between employment and yun, monitoring of prices in the market, especially yun nga, yung mga basic food or parang yung mga consumption natin of basic necessities. In terms of adequacy and safety, QC has already implemented revised policies on food quality standards and health services. By this time, yung mga dapat na isaayos na yung mga batas based sa present context sa hinihingi sa atin na by that decade na yun, na-alter na siya to fit the situation for that decade. So, moving forward,
from 2021 to 2029, we should be planting the seeds of our future. So it's important to emphasize that this is our current context. And sa decade na to, dapat na the Quezon City has already recovered from the impacts of the pandemic because we have already established that the pandemic has affected the food systems and the food security of Quezon City residents in ways more than one. Also, the Quezon City government, incorporating futures thinking, has set the goals and objectives for QC 2050. So, as early as now, kailangan ng i-apply ng Quezon City government ang futures thinking at mag-set na ng goals and standards for the QC 2050 vision. Also, dapat by this time, the Quezon City government has created a roadmap or a strategic plan towards a sustainable and food-secure Quezon City in partnership with various institutions. Dito mahalagang makita yung synergy of the different actors, the government, the academe, and CSOs and private institutions in coming up with a strategic plan committed to the attainment of the 2050 goals. And lastly, it is important that this roadmap or strategic plan is institutionalized by the Quezon City government through a policy. So for the availability, since wala pa tayong makikitang tangible progress in terms of the standards that we set, makikita natin that in terms of availability, accessibility, and adequacy and safety, dapat nandito yung further evaluation and investigation of the current situation. So in terms of demand, the Quezon City should be identifying the demographic trends of the city, taking into consideration urban migration and population growth. Kasi kailangan nga ma-meet yung demands ng Quezon City in terms of the supply. Should also identify the target population to address food insecurity and combat malnutrition. So na-establish din natin that there is an urgent need for us to address malnutrition. So kailangan ma-identify din natin yung target people and population natin na kailangan ng intervention to address such malnutrition. Ito yung ating school children, ito yung ating pregnant women and infants. And on the side of the supply, it should be able to identify idle lands that may be utilized for urban agriculture initiatives. Since Quezon City is in an urban setting, isa sa mga pinaka main programs and projects that should be utilized is the urban agriculture, and kailangan na ma-identify na yung mga lands at mga lugar kung paano natin ma-execute yung program na ito. Moreover, the Quezon City also should be evaluating the food systems that operate within the city. Kailangang ma-map ng Quezon City yung mga ating mga public markets, yung mga markets na malapit na nagpo-produce ng food sa ating mga households. In terms of accessibility, dapat ma-identify na natin yung infrastructure and technology that we need in order to institutionalize these programs and projects. And in terms of the economic factor, the Quezon City should be conducting appropriate interventions to alleviate economic concerns of QC residents, especially the urban poor. For advocacy and safety naman, kailangan na within this decade ay magkaroon ng isang consistent review of the existing policies in terms of the food safety and health standards, and as well as the prices of our food and basic commodities. And lastly, dapat ma-evaluate na ng Quezon City government ang current situation and trends of nutrition and health of our residents in the city. So ito yung mga challenges at yung mga dapat magawa ng Quezon City government from starting today, 2021, to the end of the decade, which is 2029.
The vision of having a sustainable and food-secure Quezon City that is free from hunger and malnutrition is quite hard for us to reach. But to realize this vision, we need to look at the bigger picture to see the interconnectedness of issue prohibiting us in achieving this. To sow the seeds of future in this very vast field, each sector of the community is compelled to do their part in cultivating it to ensure its growth and development so that in the end, the entire community shall reap the fruits of its labor. Thank you very much.